What's up, interpreters? I'm Liz Morrell. I'm the Historic and Cultural Resources Manager for Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation, and I am currently working really hard to coordinate the reopening of the historic Latta Place historic site.
What is up, interpreters? I am NAI Executive Director Paul Caputo, and with me, as always,
Woo, is me. What's up, interpreters? This is Song. I'm your, what am I? Your events manager.
that's a loaded question, son.
It is a loaded question. Hey, Liz, it's so nice to have you on our podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Woohoo! So you were passed on to me by our certification training gal, Kat, who is also in North Carolina, and this Latta Place has an amazing story, and you and I chatted a little bit earlier this year about it. And do you want to just kind of give us a gist of, why is it so important?
Yeah, Latta Place will be the first historic site in Mecklenburg County that is operated by a county or city or government entity. So I think that's one of the things about it that makes it really important. We have, when I say we, the county, we have worked with partners to operate historic sites in the past, at Latta Place and other spots as well across the county. But this site will actually be interpreted by county staff, managed by county staff. So because it was the first, it's been a really transformational process for county staff and partners to kind of understand the art of historic interpretation, why it's important, some of the issues that we're grappling with at the site, and the related issues that tend to come out of conversations about the site. All of this is very timely, very important, and also very new. So I think that's why it's so important. We have done work going around the country looking at other similar sites to kind of see, like, I always say the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like, what are people doing well? What are some things that we don't want to replicate? And so I feel that we are part of maybe like a coalition of practitioners across the country that are working to interpret former plantations and really do it in a truthful and compassionate way. And that happens to coincide with the semi-quincentennial, which is in 2026, also just sort of elevates all of the eyes that are on this project.
So I'm sure that in order to tell a complete story, there is a ton of research that has to happen, and it's probably not easy research to make sure that all perspectives are being represented. I'm curious to know, what are the challenges that you all have encountered in attempting to tell a complete, thoughtful story about Latta Place?
Well, there are a lot. So one challenge is just the interpretation of enslavement in North Carolina is not as fleshed out as when you're looking at the rest of the Southeast. So you would think typically of a destination like Charleston, maybe New Orleans, where there's been a lot of historians that have done work on enslavement and that time period in those areas. North Carolina, there just hasn't, for whatever reason, been as much research and as much interpretation about North Carolina. That's not to say it's not out there, it definitely is, but just looking a little more to find those sources and then start to bring them together. Two is looking at Latta Place itself. The documentation that we have is spotty at best. We contracted with a researcher from Johnson C. Smith University who went all over the state and collected archival documents, and we're starting to just work our way through those. And they're just, you got to work with what you have when you're talking about primary sources. And I think compared to maybe other sites of even a similar size, which Latta Place is fairly small, at its peak there were 34 people enslaved there, so it's not a giant plantation site. It's really more of a homestead. But there isn't a lot of primary source documentation about the site. So that means we have to rely on secondary sources, and we have to rely on information about other similar sites, which is fine, and that's part of interpretation and part of doing historic research, but it just adds kind of a additional layer. And then I would say the third challenge is just maybe starting to really interrogate some of the traditional stories that have been told about the history of Mecklenburg County. Not to say that there's not some merit in some of those stories, but to really like interrogate them and say, okay, well, what did this look like for enslaved people? What did this look like for indigenous people? How is that playing out here at the Latta site? I think having that perspective of trying to tell stories from multiple perspectives is just somewhat new. And so it's kind of deconstructing some of the typical narratives and then trying to reconstruct something new that includes elements of what's been told in the past, but is also telling it in a new kind of inclusive manner. So I've always said is like, I'll give example is the story of the Mech Deck. So the Mech Deck is basically a document, the Mecklenburg Resolves, legend or truth, depending on who you talk to, has it that leaders from Mecklenburg County actually drafted something very similar to the United States Declaration of Independence before the United States Declaration of Independence was actually drafted. That the ideas for that document actually started in Mecklenburg County and it was drafted by patriots here. So there's been some work around the truthfulness and the accuracy of that narrative. But what tends to happen is the story is always presented through the eyes of, it's like 27 white men, all of whom owned slaves, who drafted this Mecklenburg Resolves. And I think the challenge is like, it's not enough just to say, all right, well, also they had slaves and that was bad, just so you know. The challenge is to say, okay, where were the women? Like, what were they doing? Did they have any influence in this process? Where were the indigenous people? Where were the enslaved people? Were free blacks, other individuals that are part of the story. It's not enough just to say they were oppressed. It's how did they contribute to the story? How do they show up? So that's the perspective change that's really important, but also difficult.
This is a difficult story, and I know that the interpretation and the events were once run by a third party and not Mecklenburg County. And now Mecklenburg County has taken over all of it, not just the operation aspect and management of it, but the interpretive site part of it. And you're going through this big master plan now with the Latta House. And I like the methodology phases that are outlined on the website, which is imagine, design, and realize. The first one, imagine, it sounds like you have had community events to get different perspectives and to really involve the community in the planning of and reimagining and revisiting of the entire story. Can you talk a little bit about that process and community involvement?
That's a great question. Community engagement has been critical throughout this entire process, and it's looked different at different points. So the site closed in June of 2021. Our community engagement efforts kicked off pretty much immediately because we had people reaching out to us. When I say we, I mean the county, the Park and Rec Department in the county. We had various groups like the NAACP, the Mecklenburg Historic Association, UNC Charlotte, like individual organizations were reaching out saying, hey, I want to be involved in whatever the county decides to do. And then we even had like historians and living history interpreters and other folks reaching out. So that was really how our community engagement process started, is by forming this community partners group that we continue to engage with in a really, really intentional and very, very intensive manner. This group has met monthly for the past almost 3 years. It's changed membership a little bit here and there. Just sometimes people will like, they leave the county or they retire or something like that. But for the most part, it's been the same folks representing museums, representing universities, representing sort of the interpretive community and the NAACP and descendants as well. So that group has been kind of like what I would say is like the core or the backbone. Oh, and I'm sorry, recently we also added the Metropolitan Native American Association as well. So it's really important to note that we are telling the history of this site from the perspective of enslaved folks, from the perspective of the planter class, the enslavers, and from the perspective of the indigenous equally. Each of those groups gets an equal representation. Anyway, so that group has formed kind of like the core or the backbone of our community engagement. But then we've expanded it, right? So when we did our interpretive master plan, which I have a copy right here, and this is available on the website, I believe, if anyone would like to look at it.
Okay. If people
did-
because you can't see it, that was a really thick binder full of planning.
Lots of info.
She's showing
Info.
us.
But you know, and I also do strategic planning for the department, and I just my pet peeve is when people do plans and then like don't look at them. So I'm always like, implementation. I'm like yelling about implementation all the time. But anyway, so I keep it right here. But so when we did this plan, because this was our interpretive plan, and now we're doing sort of a more site plan and master plan. So it's two processes, and we're doing community engagement for both. So we've done statistically valid surveys. We've done just open surveys. Hey, anybody who wants to can take this. Then we've done focus groups. We've done community listening sessions. And so we did a lot for this interpretive master plan. We had 3 community listening sessions, as well as lots of informal engagements through our MEC Roots program, which I can talk about more. But we were concerned that our representation was not great. We were hearing from a lot of individuals who were white, who were female, who were maybe like their 40s and 50s, like kind of your typical survey respondents, which is fine. But, you know, for this site in particular, it's like we wanted to hear from populations that were probably / possibly descended from folks that were enslaved at the site. I mean, that to me was like our most important group to hear from. And so after the interpretive master plan was completed, we kind of took a more intentional, like targeted engagement process to really start to interact with some of the seniors and the elders in the North Mecklenburg community. One of our rec centers is located really close to a community where we have both anecdotal and some limited documented evidence that there are descendants of folks who were enslaved at Latta and other sites living still today. And so that was a really great kind of way to start engaging with some of those folks, because we have our rec center right there. So that was one thing that we did. And then another thing that we did is this MEC Roots program, which is kind of taking historic interpretation to people, because we don't have a site that's going to be open in the next couple of years because of all the capital improvements that we're doing. So with MEC Roots, it really becomes footloose, where we can go meet people where they are. And so we have a really wonderful contractor, actually 2 that I work with, that we actually go to our senior centers, and we partner with our Department of Social Services. They offer this free senior lunch every single day. So we will just show up, you know, 3 or 4 times a month, depending on how schedules work, do a historic interpretive program on a variety of topics. And then we also do community engagement. So it doesn't look traditional. We've taken the approach of inviting individuals to just share their story with us. Sometimes we'll ask some pointed or targeted questions, but more often it's just about a conversation. Me providing updates, listening to feedback, just inviting people to share their story if they have something that they would like to share, and then crafting programming in response to what these folks are asking for. So like one of our partners, she did a very short program on the Underground Railroad. It was like super popular. They all loved it. They were like, we want more Underground Railroad. So she did more research and she expanded the programming. So because it's like footloose, it lets us be really nimble. It lets us go meet people where they're at. And then we can also do community engagement. So that's the way we found, because there's a lot of, like you said, it's a difficult topic for everybody. I don't care who you are, unless you have been immersed in this work for a long time. If this is new to you, my experience has been, it's just hard for people to open up about it, especially with people who maybe don't have a similar background to them, you know, because it's like we're dealing with a lot of different people. And so we found that the MEC Roots program is a way to just kind of soft roll gently engage with people, maybe on some topics that aren't quite as potentially traumatizing as talking about enslavement itself, but like we'll talk about the Underground Railroad. That gets people engaged. And then, you know, depending on who the person is and how far they want to go, they can start to engage with some of the more difficult content as well.
I have, speaking of difficult conversations, I have a question about the use of the word plantation. The site itself used to be called the Latta Plantation. Am I saying Latta? Is it Latta or Latta?
Latta. I'll
Latta.
say it with
Okay.
my Midwestern accent. Latta. No, it's Latta, but it does get pronounced Latta sometimes. It's Latta is the last
A
name.
lot of the time it gets pronounced that way.
Yes.
I apologize, everybody.
No, you're
The
fine.
Latta Plantation, it was its former name. Now it's Latta Place. You have used the word plantation, you know, just in the course of describing the site.
Yep.
So clearly that word is not off limits, but there is significance to the fact that the name changed from the Latta Plantation to the Latta Place. Can what is that significance?
Well, that is such a good question. I'm so glad you asked this because it allows me to set the record straight on one of the popular misconceptions. So this site was originally called Latta Place. And what we found through our research as staff was that it was renamed Latta Plantation sometime in the 80s or 90s. And we think that that was done as actually a branding strategy because troublingly, if you look at a lot of promotional material for historic sites and other just entertainment sites from around the time of the bicentennial, like late 70s into the 80s, plantation is not seen, the word is not perceived the way that it is today. Like if you hear the word plantation today, you're going to think enslavement, bad, you know, brutalization, things like that. From everything I've done, and I have a background in discourse analysis from my graduate work, so I got kind of into this. Plantation, the word was like, it was very nostalgic. So it was more like, you know, thinking about the architecture and what clothes were people wearing and, you know, just the antebellum South, right? This Gone with the Wind kind of thing. So at the time, if you're calling something a plantation, it may actually attract tourists in that period of time, which is again not the case now. So we think that it was renamed, and Latta itself is in a nature preserve, the Latta Nature Preserve. It was also when the historic site was kind of renamed or rebranded as a plantation, the entire nature preserve was as well. So it was Latta Plantation Park, Latta Plantation Nature Preserve, Latta Plantation. And then what happened was, as the years went on, people started to question it and say, you know, this, even just the use of this word is bothersome, right? So we had direct customer feedback about the name of the nature preserve. And in response to that, changed it from Latta Plantation Nature Preserve to Latta Nature Preserve. So that was kind of step one. And then step two was once we started digging into the history of the site, I mean, my first question was like, well, let's make sure we have the name right. So when you go back and you look at original documentation, it's Latta Place. And even the nonprofit that operated the site was Latta Place Inc. So the plantation word is actually the inaccurate word. So that's why it's now Latta Place. And that was something that we got input from our community partners on, you know, because what I didn't want to do, and I think it happened anyway, and I'm just not sure how I or any of us could have controlled the narrative better, although I'm sure there are ways, but the perception, I think, in the public eye tended to be, well, they're trying to like whitewash history or they're trying to like downplay the brutality that happened here. And that's not in any way the case. Like anybody that's worked with our group or come and, you know, read the master plan, you would know for sure, like that's not what we're doing. It was just that we wanted to be historically accurate, and that's the name of the site. So there are other sites like Middleton Place, which is in Charleston, which is also called a place. And the reason for that is because it's a smaller site than what you might think of as, for example, we have Rural Hill Plantation, which is a much larger site that's also within our inventory at Mecklenburg County. 130 people at least were enslaved there, and it's like a lot of fields, and it's several, you know, there's like a big barn, and it's just a bigger footprint. Latta Place itself was much smaller, and so I think maybe that's why the term place was originally used in the first place. But yeah, I'm glad you asked that. And I think plantation is just one of those tough words that you know, when you really look at the definition of a plantation, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a site that had enslaved people working there. A plantation is really like, we have plantations of pine trees in some of our nature preserves. It's just a large area where things are planted, but popularly and historically, the word has come to represent more. And so it becomes a little bit loaded and a little bit charged. And we're never one to shy away from accuracy, the truth of what happened. If it's a plantation, we're going to call it a plantation. In this case, it just happened to be, it's a place where people were enslaved.
So Liz, Latta Place is scheduled to reopen later this year in 2024 with like full programming and staffing?
Well, we're
schedule?
not going to reopen this year as much as I'd like to. We have significant capital improvements, including some infrastructural improvements that need to take place before we can reopen. We have things like fire protection and sewer and septic, and again, things I never thought in my life I would be really learning about, but it's been interesting for me as I've gone through this process. But in order to really serve the public in the way that we're wanting to, there are substantial investments that need to take place at the site. So those are just going to take some time. We are in the process of determining whether we want to kind of renovate and expand the existing visitor center that's there, or whether we want to build a new one. All of the outbuildings that are there are some that really aren't historically accurate. So, whether they're going to stay, we're kind of talking through that. So there are a number of wayfinding, accessibility, all that kind of stuff that's just important for us as the county when we have a site, that we're going to make sure all of that is where it needs to be. So that's going to take some time. So no, we will not open in 2024. I hope it is soon though. And that is another place where the MEC Roots programming kind of comes in, because it's allowing us to still start to do some historic interpretation, even if it's not specifically at the site. But when it opens, and again, the operational piece is still kind of, we're still having conversations about it. But we're looking to start with having guided tours, potentially just one day a week, just to kind of gauge what the interest is and what our attendance looks like. We are going to have self-guided tours that are going to be available, anytime. And then one of our really important strategic focuses is to engage with groups, particularly school groups. I'm a former 7th grade social studies teacher, and it's really important to me that we work with the public schools to intentionally bring students out to the site. I know for me, like, I fell in love with this field from me visiting museums and historic sites, and all the content that I had learned in the classroom really coming alive. I think the information that we're going to be sharing at the site is something that is foundational for every American in terms of just being a good citizen and looking to the future of our country and how we grapple with our past and understanding why things are the way that they are today, that is directly tied to the events that occurred at this site. I think every student should get that information in a really powerful and unforgettable way. So that's going to be kind of like one of our first big strategic pushes, is to get public school students out to the site.
So obviously, I mean, this is, we've used the word difficult a number of times. This is, intense work that you all are doing, and really, difficult, I'll say it again, difficult stories. What's the personal impact on you in coming to work every single day, working with these difficult stories and trying to make sure that they're told in a thoughtful and complete way?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I'll say, first of all, that when we hire folks to come and work at the site, self-care is something that we are going to emphasize because of the emotional labor that this work entails. I feel extremely honored to have been put in a position to be able to facilitate this. And I don't even want to say the programming, because it's kind of become something that's had a bit of a ripple effect throughout like our organization here at Park and Rec and the rest of the county, because the conversations are so compelling. I think that, you know, when staff become engaged for whatever reason, even if it's somebody who works in park operations and we're talking with them about some site characteristics of the physical site, but they start to engage a little bit with the content, you know, it has this ripple effect, right? And so that's good. I mean, to me, that's really good because it's something that is healing. I believe that as a nation, America has not grappled with our past. That you can compare the United States to a place like Germany, and you can go to Germany and you can see all over the landscape that they are intentionally and very intensively engaging with their past, as you know, it pertains to the Holocaust and all of the horrors that were committed during that time. I don't believe that we've done the same thing here in the United States. And in the Southeast, I think it becomes particularly noticeable because you have tangible reminders of this past. For example, the Latta House still sitting there in the landscape. And I have had people tell me, I think we should just knock it down. I don't want to think about that. It is too painful. It is too traumatizing. And so, you know, obviously, again, another thing about me, as you can tell, is I'm white. So I'm like, okay, how can I really do this justice? And I'm hearing all these different opinions about the difficulty of this work. And a lot of people disagree. There, you know, and a lot of people who are white disagree, and a lot of people who are Black disagree. And that's just the reality. And so I had to accept that first. And then I had to accept, I've always been on a journey, I think, with equity, that I've wanted to incorporate equity into my professional practice. But this took me to an even deeper level of just listening and humility, right? And this project is not about me. The project is really something that is for Mecklenburg County. And I would say I'm hoping as a catalyst for transformation in the way that we deal with our history. All that has come at, I don't want to say a cost, but I've had to really intentionally make sure that I'm educating myself and B, taking care of myself. And so I think that that is something that you could talk to any one of our staff who've been engaged in any way with this, and they would probably tell you the same thing. So I think when you're doing this kind of work, it's important to remember, like, this is what we do professionally, but it's a personal journey. And again, it's a privilege. It's a wonderful thing because you get to grow and you get to heal, but that's not always easy. It takes some work, and it takes a lot of humility and honesty.
Right. Liz, this is a lot of information. Again, like you're saying, very emotional, difficult. We'll say that word again. But I am excited with your progress, with Mecklenburg County's progress on this, and the very intentional way that you're involving community and loads of research. Very thoughtful. And I personally am excited to go see it when it opens. I think that'll be
Oh, we can't wait. Yes, you'll be a VIP.
woo, I love it.
Well, and
Thank you
we'd be
both.
remiss if we didn't, I think, shout out our longtime board member, Pepe Chavez, who is a longtime employee of Mecklenburg County in North Carolina. And so, obviously, you know, he's a friend and a colleague. And so I know that you work with him as well. So,
Yeah.
Liz,
Pepe's been wonderful. Yes. He's
we
an
have no
active
doubt that
member
is not a surprise.
yeah, he's an active member of our department equity team, and he has contributed to many of the conversations that I was just talking about, you know, that are department-wide conversations about how we deal with these issues. And Pepe's been wonderful. So hi, Pepe, if you're watching, thanks for all you do.
Well, Liz, thank you so much. Where can folks find Latta Place online?
So we have a public input site, which is if you Google Latta Place, I don't know the web address off the top of my head, but it'll come up and you can actually provide input. Right now we have a head and heart exercise up there. So you can look at the site and you can respond with different emotions that, maybe makes you feel angry, makes you feel curious, makes you feel sad. So we're collecting data about how people emotionally engage with different parts of the site. That's up there right now. And then we always have just free form comments. If you have anything that you want to share with our group, you can do it there. As far as updates are concerned, those are on our county website, which is latta.mcnc.gov. And we try to keep that up to date.
Thank you again, Liz, so much for joining us on this podcast.
And interpreters,
Interpreters,
that's what's up.
What's up.